Summer of 1985. The Bel Air mansion glowed like a lantern against the California night, its windows spilling golden light across manicured lawns where Hollywood's elite gathered to celebrate another year of excess and achievement. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell in waves. The scent of expensive cigars mixed with jasmine from the garden, creating an intoxicating perfume that seemed to embody everything glamorous and corrupt about the industry. This was a party thrown by one of the studio heads, the kind of invitation that served as a census of who mattered in the film business. If you weren't here, you weren't anyone. And tonight, two very different legends found themselves breathing the same rarefied air. Clint Eastwood stood near the bar, nursing a beer in a room full of champagne drinkers. At 55, he had achieved everything an actor could dream of: box office success, critical recognition, the freedom to direct his own films. But there was something restless in those famous steel blue eyes tonight, something unsettled. The industry was changing around him. Younger stars were rising. The press had started asking when he would retire, as if a man in his 50s had already outlived his usefulness. He had heard the whispers: Eastwood's time is passing. The cowboy era is over. Even legends fade. Across the room, holding court like a decaying emperor, sat Marlon Brando. At 61, Brando was a contradiction wrapped in flesh simultaneously, the greatest actor of his generation and a cautionary tale of squandered genius. He had revolutionized screen acting with A Streetcar Named Desire, defined cool with The Wild One, reached impossible heights with The Godfather and Apocalypse Now. But he had also gained enormous weight, retreated from public life, taken embarrassing roles for massive paychecks, and seemed determined to mock the very industry that had crowned him king. Tonight, he wore a Hawaiian shirt that strained against his bulk, his eyes carrying that famous mixture of brilliance and contempt that had terrified directors for decades. These two men had never been close. Their paths had crossed occasionally. Hollywood is a small town for those at the top, but they represented different philosophies, different eras, different approaches to the craft. Brando was method, internal, transformative, disappearing into characters until his own identity seemed to dissolve. Eastwood was minimalist, external, iconic, playing variations of himself with such precision that the performance became invisible. Critics had spent years debating which approach was superior. The men themselves had never discussed it. If you want to discover what Marlon Brando whispered to Clint Eastwood that night, the brutal truth about fame that only a broken legend could deliver, and how those words shaped every decision Eastwood made for the next 4 decades, stay until the end of this story. What happened in the next 10 minutes didn't just change one man's perspective, it revealed the darkest secret of Hollywood success. The party swirled around them both. Oblivious to the collision course that fate had set, Eastwood was considering leaving these events had never been his scene, and the beer was warm when he noticed Brando watching him. Not glancing, watching, with an intensity that seemed almost predatory. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or curiosity, or the unspoken understanding that exists between men who have climbed the same mountain by different routes. Brando raised a hand and gestured for Eastwood to approach. It wasn't a request. It was a summons delivered with the casual authority of a man who had spent his entire life being obeyed. Eastwood hesitated for a moment. He didn't take orders well, never had, but curiosity won over pride. He crossed the room slowly, aware that other guests were watching, whispering, wondering what the great Brando could possibly want with a cowboy actor. "Sit down," Brando said, gesturing to an empty chair beside him. His voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle, but there was something underneath it. A weight, a sadness, a warning. "We need to talk." Eastwood sat. Up close, Brando looked older than his years, his face a map of indulgence and regret. But those eyes, those famous eyes that had seduced a million moviegoers, remained sharp, penetrating, almost uncomfortably intelligent. This was not the buffoon the tabloids described. This was something else entirely. "You're smart," Brando said without preamble, "smarter than most of the idiots in this room. You direct your own films. You control your own career. You don't play the game the way they want you to play it." He paused, studying Eastwood's face as if searching for something. "That's good. That's rare. But I'm going to tell you something that nobody else will, because nobody else has lived it the way I have." Eastwood said nothing, just watched, waited. That famous stillness that had served him so well on screen now served him here. In this strange, charged moment, Brando leaned closer. And when he spoke, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The words came out slowly, deliberately, as if each one had been polished by years of bitter experience. This industry doesn't love you. It will never love you. It will use you until you're empty, and then it will throw you away like garbage. The awards, the money, the fame, none of it means anything. I have an Oscar in my bathroom that I use as a doorstop. You know why? Because the same people who gave me that statue would watch me die in the street and step over my body to get to the next party. He sat back, letting the words sink in. Around them, the party continued, the clinking glasses, the false laughter, the endless performance of success. But it all seemed muted now, distant, like a television playing in another room. I made a mistake, Brando continued, and there was something in his voice now that Eastwood had never heard from him. Vulnerability, perhaps. I let them define me. I let the critics tell me I was a genius, and then I let them tell me I was a failure. I let the studios control what I did, and then I rebelled so hard that I destroyed myself just to prove a point. I played their game, and then I refused to play, and both choices led to the same place. He gestured at himself, at the bulk, at the Hawaiian shirt, at the decay. Here, alone, surrounded by people who don't know me and wouldn't care if they did. Eastwood finally spoke. So, what's the alternative? Brando smiled, a genuine smile, tired but real. That's the right question. Most people ask how to win the game. You're asking if there's a different game entirely. He nodded slowly, as if Eastwood had passed some kind of test. The alternative is simple, but almost nobody has the discipline to do it. You build something that's yours, not theirs. Yours. Something they can't take away, can't control, can't destroy when they decide you're no longer useful. He leaned forward again, and his voice dropped even lower. You direct films. Good. Build a body of work that stands on its own. That doesn't depend on whether you're still pretty enough, or young enough, or famous enough. Invest your money wisely. Don't blow it on mansions and ex-wives and lawyers like I did. Stay out of the gossip columns. Don't give them ammunition. Don't give them anything. And most importantly, he jabbed a finger toward Eastwood's chest, don't let them see you sweat. Don't let them see you age. Don't let them see you fail. Because the moment they smell blood, they'll tear you apart just for the pleasure of watching a tall man fall. The words hung in the air between them. Eastwood sat perfectly still, processing everything he had just heard. This wasn't Hollywood wisdom. This wasn't career advice from a mentor. This was a warning from a man who had walked through fire and emerged burned, broken, but somehow still standing. This was Marlon Brando, the greatest actor of his generation. Perhaps of any generation, admitting that he had lost a war he hadn't even known he was fighting until it was too late. Why are you telling me this? Eastwood asked. Brando was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible over the party noise. Because I see something in you that I used to see in myself. Control, discipline, a refusal to beg. You're not like the others, Clint. You don't need their approval to know your own worth. That's your strength. He paused. But it's also your danger, because they'll never forgive you for it. They'll never forgive you for not needing them. And one day, when you're old and tired and you think you've won, they'll come for you. They always come. The only question is whether you'll be ready. They sat in silence for a while longer. The party ebbed and flowed around them. Someone laughed too loudly. Glass shattered somewhere, a waiter dropping a tray. The ordinary chaos of Hollywood celebration continued, indifferent to the conversation that was reshaping one man's entire understanding of his life. Finally, Brando stood. It took effort. His body had betrayed him in ways his mind never had, but he managed it with a kind of damaged dignity. He looked down at Eastwood with an expression that mixed exhaustion with something almost like affection. Remember what I said? Build something they can't take away. And don't end up like me, a fat man in a Hawaiian shirt, telling strangers at parties about the career I pissed away because I was too proud to admit I needed a strategy. He smiled that tired smile again. You're better than this place, Clint. Don't let it swallow you. And then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd with surprising grace for a man his size, leaving Eastwood alone with a warm beer and a head full of thoughts that would take years to fully process. The drive home to Carmel that night was long and quiet. Eastwood played no music, made no calls. He just drove through the darkness, turning Brando's words over in his mind like stones in a river, feeling their weight, their edges, their uncomfortable truth. The industry doesn't love you. It will never love you. Build something they can't take away. He thought about his career, the spaghetti westerns, Dirty Harry, the films he had directed. He thought about the critics who had dismissed him for decades, calling him a competent craftsman, as if competence were an insult. He thought about the younger actors rising through the ranks, the action stars with their muscles and their explosions, the pretty boys who would inevitably replace him in the public imagination. He thought about time, about age, about the relentless mathematics of mortality, and somewhere on that dark highway, Clint Eastwood made a decision. He would do exactly what Brando said. He would build something they couldn't take away. Over the next 4 decades, Eastwood followed that advice with the same discipline he brought to everything. He directed film after film, not for the studios, not for the critics, but for himself. Bird, Unforgiven, American Sniper. Each project chosen carefully, executed efficiently, released without fanfare or ego. He stayed out of the tabloids, avoided scandal, invested his money wisely, and built an empire in Carmel that owed nothing to Hollywood's approval. The awards came for Oscars. 5 nominations, countless other honors, but he accepted them with the same quiet detachment Brando had described. He knew what they were worth. He knew what they weren't worth. He had learned the lesson that most of Hollywood never learns. The only currency that matters is the work itself. Everything else is noise. When journalists asked about his longevity, about how he had remained relevant for over 60 years in an industry that devours its young, Eastwood rarely gave a straight answer. He would talk about work ethic, about preparation, about showing up on time and under budget, but he never mentioned that night in 1985. He never mentioned Brando's warning, "Some lessons are too valuable to share." Marlon Brando died in 2004, alone in his Mulholland Drive mansion, surrounded by the wreckage of his genius. He was 80 years old, morbidly obese, estranged from most of his family, remembered as much for his eccentricities as for his art. The obituaries were respectful, but tinged with sadness, the story of a man who had touched greatness, and then systematically destroyed himself. A cautionary tale. A waste. Eastwood attended no public memorial, made no public statement, but those who knew him said he was quieter than usual in the weeks after Brando's death. He was thinking, perhaps, about that conversation 20 years earlier. About the warning that had been given and the warning that had been heeded. About 2 men who had climbed the same mountain by different routes and ended up in very different places. The lesson of Marlon Brando's warning is not about Hollywood. It is about life. Every industry, every field, every human endeavor has its version of the same trap, the seduction of external validation, the belief that awards and recognition and approval from others can fill the void inside. Brando fell into that trap and never escaped. Eastwood heard the warning and built a different path. "You have to know who you are," Eastwood said in an interview years later, long after Brando was gone. "You can't let other people define you. The moment you give them that power, you've lost. You've lost yourself." He paused, and for a moment something flickered across his face, a memory, perhaps, of a summer night in Bel Air and a broken emperor in a Hawaiian shirt. "Someone told me that once. A long time ago. Best advice I ever got." If this story moved you, if it made you think about who's defining your worth and whether you're building something they can't take away, I want to hear about it. Hit that like button if you felt the weight of Brando's words. Subscribe if you want more untold Hollywood stories that reveal the human truth behind the legends. Share this with someone who needs to hear that external validation is a trap. They might need this message today. And comment below. What are you building that no one can take away? What's your legacy? Your story matters, and the world needs to hear it. Until next time, remember, legends aren't made by chasing approval. They're made by building something real, something lasting, something yours. The industry doesn't love you. Build something that doesn't need its love.